Small walled cloisters dot the landscapes of the worlds of D&D, tiny refuges from the flow of ordinary life, where time seems to stand still. I really like this quote from the Player's Handbook. It feels very evocative, and it fits in with my fantasy notions of what I think a monk is. Unfortunately, it completely fails from a world-building point of view, by casting monks as outsiders in the setting. To me, monks have always felt a bit half in, half out in D&D, and there's a sense of ambivalence towards fully integrating them within the setting. And today I want to address that. Throughout this video I'm going to be coming back to the quote from the start, so I can break it down and offer suggestions on how to improve it. Obviously it is a small introductory line in the Player's Handbook, and was not intended to fully sum up everything about monks in the game, but is a convenient device for me to make the points that I want to make. Firstly, we have these walled cloisters. This phrase implies a sense of isolation. These are places where no one can enter or leave. Importantly, it implies that the PCs cannot access these locations. Monks should be seen out and about in the community. They should be giving sermons, receiving charity, getting into arguments and fights. Also, monasteries should be places that the player characters are interested in visiting, even if they're located halfway up a mountain or on some remote island. A monastery could be a great place to get quests and specialist services. For example, the head abbot might be very knowledgeable about plants and medicine, and speaking to them might provide a clue as to how to deal with the lycanthropy curse that's currently plaguing the land. Next we have the phrase, dot the landscapes of the worlds of D&D. This is fine, I guess they probably do dot the landscapes, but there's still a vagueness about it. In every settlement, forest, river, lake, mountain, island, there's an opportunity for a monastery. We tend to assume that every major settlement in our world will have temples to various gods of the setting, to the point where we might not even bother including them in our world-building notes. We just wait for the players to say, I want to visit the temple of this god. We could easily do the same for monasteries. I tend to think of monks as an afterthought in the setting. I'll draw out the world map and then realise I haven't given the monks a place to live, so I'll stick down one monastery and say the monks live here. The last part of this quote I want to discuss is refuges from the flow of ordinary life. It is another phrase that puts the monks apart from the setting. Again, I want to take a cue from how we usually think about temples and churches. Even a temple to a lawful good deity can suffer from pettiness and infighting and intrigue. Your monks are just the same. Taking up a life of meditation and contemplation doesn't protect you entirely from politics, whether it be infighting over who will succeed the head abbot, or dealing with external matters like which side to support in the war. You should spend some time thinking about the goals and beliefs of your monks, as you would for any other organisation in your world. I was thinking about this recently when I was designing a dungeon, in which a group of cultists are worshipping a creature they created, which is a cross between a red dragon and a crystal basilisk. And I thought, what if the cultists were monks? They could have unearthed some arcane tome telling them how to create this creature, and then gone out to do so believing that they were being guided by their god. A group of monks would certainly have the dedication to complete such a project. I also like the idea that the monks had cut out their eyes to avoid the stare of the Draculisk, but could use their monk skills to blind fight. Next time when creating an organisation for your D&D game, it might be worth considering if monks would fit the role. So lastly, I want to say the most obvious thing about monks and setting that I haven't mentioned. That is that the fantasy of monks come from Chinese martial arts, whereas most other elements of D&D use an assumed fantasy medieval Europe. And for me this creates a kind of paradox. When I think about integrating monks more into my setting, I often feel like it comes at a cost of what makes them feel special and different to the other classes. I can't really think of a solution to this, which is why I'm mentioning it at the end of the video. I think that most of the time monks in D&D function in a similar way to druids. The word druid refers to a particular class of people in a particular society at a particular time. But in D&D, the word druid is usually interpreted to mean something like nature wizard, which gives it the flexibility to be run outside of its original context. And the same is true for monks. A lot of players think of monks as being martial artists, and they think of it as a kind of variant fighter. In this sense, the class becomes generic, like fighters and rogues. And in my opinion, that's a shame. Anyway, that's most of what I have to say on the topic. I have the same problems with elves and dwarves and other non-humans in my campaigns. A lot of D&D campaigns tend to be fairly human-centered. And then the players turn up playing Aarakocra and Minotaurs and Dragonborn. And I'm like, okay, your characters are cool, but what are they doing here? Why have they decided to show up in this kingdom and just start messing things up? But as a DM, I think about these kinds of things like character motivation, whereas most players are just happy to smash.